anybody else, we'll sit back and say, well, you know, if you're discouraged, then maybe you need to go somewhere else. Maybe it's time for you to move on. We'll fire them, you know, and okay, so they're already discouraged. Things isn't going exactly the way they wanted it to, and now they've lost their job. They've lost any kind of encouragement that they might have received. They now have got to try to find another place. Let me tell you something about preachers, and I'm going to be honest with you about this. Whenever you're younger, everybody wants you. As you get older, nobody wants you. And that's true of, and that's true of a lot of other jobs too. I'm not going to argue that, but especially when it comes to preachers, because of the fact that a lot of people want somebody that's going to be able to connect with younger people. And so they're going to struggle with hiring a man that's over 60. They're going to be struggling whenever they look at the resume of a man that's in his 50s. Why? Because they think he's too old. They think he won't connect with the young people. We try to place so much of an emphasis upon young people in the church today that in a lot of situations, we're not thinking about the older. We're not thinking about the others. And so a lot of times we have really, and I'm trying to be honest and open and forthright about that, but as a result of that, we don't think about those that are older. A lot of them times, some of the older members feel like nobody cares about them. They feel like that nobody is really thinking about what they need, and they need encouragement. They need counseling as they get older. They're dealing with things like constant pain or not being able to remember or some things like this that nobody that's younger is going to associate with. The Bible emphasizes the idea that God wants in the church younger people, amen? But he also tells the older people to what? Be the guide for the younger people. And what should happen, now let me make this clear. I'm going to preach on this for a few minutes, but I want to be honest about it, okay? God's ultimate responsibility for young people, bringing young people up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, falls squarely on the parents. We put in Bible classes, we hire youth ministers to help the parents. But what has happened in our culture today is both mom and dad are having to work. They barely have enough time to get home and eat before they fall exhausted in their bed. They might try to take the time to get their children's homework done to try to keep the children. And then a lot of times to keep the children interactive, they'll go to softball, soccer, baseball, you name it. And then they try to squeeze in, let's be honest about this, maybe 4 hours a week in church. That's if they come Sunday morning Bible class, Sunday morning worship, Sunday evening worship, and Wednesday night. A lot of times the people that are teaching in our Bible classes are not very well prepared. I don't mean to be ugly about that, but I'm being honest. We've got to be honest before we can address the problem. They have us, yeah, because they're working jobs too. So a lot of times they are these parents that are already run ragged, that are already trying to teach their children, but they're also trying to teach some other children as well. And then we sit down and wring our hands in the church and ask ourselves, why are we losing so many of our young people? What is the Bible way of handling that situation? The older are to teach the younger, and not just their parents, but their grandparents and other members of the church. If Roger can't talk to his parents about something, he ought to be able to have 2 or 3 foster grandparents that he can go talk to about whatever's going on in his life. But in any congregation of the Lord's church nowadays, you've got your youth clique, you've got your senior clique, you've got your middle-aged clique, you've got the women's clique, you've got the men's clique, you've got all of this, and nobody's talking to one another. And what's happened, and this is my way of looking at it, in the Lord's church is we're losing members quicker than we can baptize them, and we're trying to figure out what's wrong. We have forgotten and we have failed to realize that God, as the church, expects us to be there to encourage one another. So if you're 65 years old or older, you still have a responsibility to help that teenager, maybe with whatever they've got going on in their lives. And you've got to develop a relationship with them. They're not going to sit there and just listen to you preach at them. They're not going to sit and listen to anybody preach. They're not going to listen to a preacher preach at them. He's out of touch. He's 60 years old. So, let's just go hire another man, or we're going to hire. And again, this is to me, one of the biggest issues. And I'm trying to get all this crammed in very quickly and I'll get off my soapbox. But we hire a youth guy. He will have a lot of fellowship activities with them and everything like that. But more often than not, he'll go somewhere else. The youth, let's be honest about this. He goes somewhere else. So the young people that have grown attached to him over the last 2 or 3 or 4 years now have got to get used to somebody else. Same thing with preachers. Same thing with all these others. What's happening as a result of that is, this is what I think was really happening in the church in the 60s and the 70s. We would hire a man. He would come in there for about 2 years, maybe 3, maybe 4. And after that 2 or 3 or 4 years, what happens? You have a honeymoon period when you're a preacher. You can't do anything wrong. Everything is great. Everything is wonderful. They're listening and hanging on every word you say. Man, it is great. And then, like a honeymoon period with a family, a husband and a wife, they start adjusting. Well, I've heard you preach that before. I've heard you say that before. Now, the preacher has the responsibility to continue to study and grow in the Word. But a lot of times, preachers don't. So here's what happens. They preach, and usually the first 2 years, whenever a preacher's there, he's trying to get to know the congregation. And so what do you do the first 2 years when you really don't know what the people need? You preach first principle sermons. Why we're supposed to be baptized, why we don't use an instrument in our music, why we partake of the Lord's Supper every Sunday. We get all these first principle sermons, which we need to hear. Amen? Okay. But then what happens is he's starting to get to know the folks in the church, and he starts to understand where some of the problems are in the church. So he starts addressing those problems, and people then now, well, I don't know if I like what he had to say about that now. And then what begins to happen? Slowly but surely, everybody can agree with the first principles. Everybody thinks if I come to church on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and I've been baptized, and I study my Bible, I'm going to be okay. I'm okay, you're okay, we're all going to be okay. Challenge brethren to go out and evangelize. Challenge brethren to go out and teach somebody else the gospel. And then it's like, that's what we pray the preacher to do. No, you don't, because the preacher can never do all of that. I'm just being as honest as I can be about it. Now, preachers get discouraged. They might go through when everybody's so excited about them being there, they're excited about being there, they're really encouraged and everything like that, then they start hearing the backbiting a little bit. They start hearing some of this stuff. They try to do better. They're trying to serve the church, be what they need to be for the church. In the first church that I was at, I never did enough visiting. In the second church I was at, I visited too much. You know what I'm trying to say? And so you can't make everybody happy. You're not supposed to make everybody happy. You're supposed to preach and teach the word. But guess what? You're going to get discouraged. So here's what I think happened in the Lord's church back in the 60s and 70s. We started going through preachers about every 2 to 3 to 4 years. We didn't like one, so we'd just go hire, we'd fire him and go get another one, right? We had preachers' houses, right? What was the purpose of the preacher's house? Well, that way we don't have to pay him. And you know what? We don't have to pay him to get a house. So these guys would what? Literally, they would live their lives in preachers' houses, and they wouldn't even have their own when it come time to retire. Usually, they're not making really enough money to pay into Social Security. They're not going to have a retirement. They don't have like a place that if you've been at a place 30 or 20 or 30 years, you've got some sort of retirement. They don't have a retirement. So now they get older. And what usually ends up happening, and again, I'm speaking from they want you when you're young, and the only folks that want you when you're older are the smaller churches that can't afford the younger guys. And they'll put you in a preacher's house. You can't afford to retire because you've not had anything really in that situation. So what winds up happening is you just kind of get discouraged and you can get down and out and you got to get depressed about it. But it's also hurt the church because the church knows the first principles, but they haven't gone. I don't think the church as a brotherhood has grown past the first principles in a lot of situations. They've not grown and matured. That's why you have one or two brethren in the church. That's the boss. Huh?
We're commanded to grow.
Yes, exactly right. We are commanded to, but we don't do it. If all you hear all the time is, it's like feeding a baby. There comes a point when you got to start feeding the baby some solid food. If you give the baby a milk all of his life, he's not going to grow. He's going to be stunted. That's what's happened in the church. So you've had a lot of churches that have closed the doors. They can't find a preacher. They want a guy to preach the same first principle sermons that they agree with all along anyway. And if you challenge them to grow and to grow in faith, they may not like what you say, and it's always easier to go find somebody else that's looking for a preaching job. Now, I said all that, and I'm not trying to draw please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I have been blessed. Let me say this. The first church I worked for 2.5 years. And I was the youngest person there. My wife was 18, I was 20. And we were the youngest people there. And I got very angry a couple of times because some of the older men, I'm going to talk to you like I talk to my son. And on one occasion, they hit me the wrong way. And I said, I'm not your son. You're not going to talk to me like that. Left there. Moved to another congregation. Worked there for 5.5 years. Okay. And I was blessed. But I felt like I wasn't growing to the point where I'm helping them to grow. We were just satisfied. You know, we had door knocking meetings and stuff like that. We were just satisfied. But after a while, I got to thinking, well, maybe it's better for them if they get somebody else. So I resigned. And I went to another congregation. I was there 6 months. I met Diotrephes, descendant, in that congregation. He had tore that church up 20 years before and kept thinking that the problems that tore the church up there is coming in every time they get a new preacher. We had a time where some of the people were traveling 40 to 50 miles to come to church because that was the only church in the area. And so actually one Sunday we suggested, well, we're going to have a Sunday morning worship. We're going to eat afterwards and then have another service right after that, and we'll all go home. You'd think I had actually preached from the pits of hell whenever I suggested that. Why? No, this is on a major interstate. You've got to be open at this time. And this particular brother got upset with me about this, wouldn't even come to business meetings. He ran the church from outside the business meetings. He'd hear what was going on. I don't like that decision. And he'd get everybody to change their mind. And in that one particular situation, I finally said, I've had it. So we called a congregational meeting. I said, this is what's happened. This is what's happening. And now what does everybody think? And the majority of the church wanted to do what I suggested. Now, it's only one time. One time. And he stood up and said, you're tearing this church apart. He said, what about those folks that's traveling on this interstate? They're not going to be able to worship. I said, brother, you got a key? Yeah. I said, you be here at 6 o'clock. Meet them if they're not here to worship. Give them the Lord's Supper. We're going to be at home. Now, you might think I was being pushy, but I was probably the only one that stood up to him. And the problem is he ran everybody else off, so I couldn't afford to live there anymore. Okay, they couldn't pay my salary anymore. So now I said, you know what, I'm going to try my best. And so we went in this congregation that I'm at now, and God has blessed me with 30 years. And we merged two congregations together. We have brought new life. But at the same time, problems are still going to be there. There's been some problems with sin in this congregation. And let me even go a little bit further in this respect. And then the pandemic hit, and now the race problems, and we're multiracial. So those things have come up. And it gets discouraging. The point I'm trying to make, I'm not trying to want to scare anybody off from being a preacher. All righty? We need preachers. I'm not trying to emphasize the bad. I'm trying to be honest and tell you what the bad is.
I've heard other people say just what you're saying.
Okay? As we look here in Numbers chapter 11, we see a brother, Moses, that has had it. He has led the children of Israel out of Egypt. Every time something went wrong, he's the guy that catches all the complaints, or so he thinks. Okay? He's the guy that feels like he can't do this by himself. He feels like he's by himself. He feels like he feels like, and yet at the same time, he also knows that God is there. But even though you might know that God is there and you're developing that relationship with God as Moses was, think about it in this respect, this whole thing that Moses didn't want this job to begin with. Remember Exodus chapter 3 and 4? Then he actually takes it, and then he starts having all these difficulties and all these problems. But you see him constantly going to God. But then there comes times whenever you just, after a while, you just don't think about doing that, or you don't spend the time with God that you need to. Leaders a lot of times will be studying constantly for Bible classes, for lessons, for other lessons, for funerals. I preached a funeral Monday that I wasn't expecting. You know what I'm trying to say? This stuff happens, and what begins to happen is you're not feeding your own soul, and as a result of that, you just get to the point to where you're just feeling like you're the only one out there. And devil wants you to do that. So here's Moses. And as it turns out in Numbers chapter 11, the people complained. It displeased the Lord. His anger was aroused. The fire of the Lord burned among them. Then the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire was quenched. So then we looked at this last week. But I'm just trying to get our mind brought back up. Then verse 4. Right after that happened, a mixed multitude yearned for stuff they weren't getting. They were tired of eating manna day in and day out. Okay? And he talks about he said, there's nothing but this manna before our eyes. I just want to go back and eat at Longhorn and all these other places that I had back in Egypt. You know, I'm teasing here, okay? I'm trying obviously to interject some sort of joy, but you know, that's what it is. And so they were complaining about this situation, and they're complaining. The thing that I love about this is whenever Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, verse 10, the anger of the Lord was greatly aroused. Moses was displeased. And so what did Moses do? Listen to Moses' prayer beginning in 11. Why have you afflicted your servant? Why have I not found favor in your sight that you have laid the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I beget them that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a guardian? He says, where am I to get meat to get to all these people? For they weep all over me. Give us meat that we may eat. I am not able to bear all these people alone. If you treat me like this, please kill me here and now if I have found favor in your sight. Notice how many times I and me is in that very short prayer. What's suggesting that to us? He's heard the complaining, so now he complains. You see, that's what winds up happening. We get around in a situation like this, and it becomes easy to what? To do what everybody else is doing. And so that's the reason why I asked the question. This is the reason I really asked the question, what should we do whenever we're struggling with discouragement? Moses took the complaint of the people as an indictment of his leadership. And the thing is, sometimes preachers and elders take it personal. And they say, why in the world Why am I going to try to do this? Why am I even bothering? Because it seems like they can't do anything about it. Moses couldn't give these people anything like the leeks or the cucumbers or the watermelons or anything like that. He couldn't feed all these people. But you see, he felt like the burden was all on him. And because he was around them, he then became like them. And then, as it continued to get worse and worse and worse, then you see how the Lord had to just kind of pull him up a little bit and give him some encouragement. What did he say? Verse 16, and this is where I wanted to start tonight. The Lord said to Moses, gather to me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people and officers over them. Bring them to the tabernacle of meeting, that they may stand here with you. Then I will come down and talk with you there. I will take of the spirit that is upon you and put the same on them, and they shall bear the burden of the people with you, that you may not bear it yourself alone. I love what God does here. He says, you can't do this by yourself. You feel like you're doing this by yourself. You have forgotten that I'm orchestrating this whole thing, Moses. So you go and choose 70 men to help you with this task. Now, whether the men that we looked at earlier when we found the leaders of each tribe, whether this was part of the 70 or not, we're not for certain. But what's he doing? He's getting them to share the responsibility. One preacher cannot bear the responsibility for 200 members. Why do we have elders in the church? Somebody says, well, God tells us to. Well, amen. But why do we go for years without elders? What happens when a church goes for years without elders? The preacher becomes the figurehead. There's always, I've said this, and I don't mean to be ugly about this, but there's always seems to be one or two brothers that might be more influential than others because maybe they're giving more money or because maybe they're just helping out a lot more. And what winds up happening is if the preacher gets on the wrong side of those two guys, he's time to pack his bag. I'm being honest. I'm not trying to discourage anybody here. I'm just being honest about what's happened in the church. And what has to happen is more men need to step up to the plate. They may not be able to serve as elders in the viewpoint of 1 Timothy 3 and Titus chapter 1 and meeting the qualifications. But let me, if I can for just a moment, pontificate on those qualifications. We should find men that meet those qualifications in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 to the very best of their ability. But more often in the church, we have used those as disqualifications. You know what I mean? Well, what I'm talking about in that respect, we start going through the list and we start comparing that person's life with what he says that they're supposed to be. All righty, so let's look at this for just a minute.
You're saying they don't measure up.
They don't measure up. Now, here's the thing that he says, first of all, an elder or bishop must be blameless. Well, we've all committed sin. So some people raise that so high that he has to be Jesus Christ himself because they can't have any sin. Let me give you another example, the husband of one wife. So we'll spend hours, trees and forests have been killed to discuss whether or not a man can be divorced or remarried if he had a scriptural divorce. You see what I'm trying to say? Was it a scriptural divorce? So we start getting into all that. Well, I just don't know if I trust him to do that or not. Let me tell you another situation. The actual Greek here, the husband of one wife, actually can be translated a one-woman man. So I want you to think about it this way. Suppose an elder loses his wife. Does he automatically become disqualified? In the eyes of a lot of brethren, he does. Now, what's happened? It's not anything that he is guilty of. He's just lost his wife. But now all of a sudden, because he's not the husband of one wife, well, he's still a one-woman man. Even though his wife is dead, he's still a one-woman man. Now, brethren will argue up one side and down the other about that. Well, he can't be an elder anymore because he doesn't have a wife. Well, the Greek says he has to be the whole time he was married to that woman, was he a one-woman man? Yeah. Now, I understand the concerns that some people have. Well, if he serves as an elder and he's trying to give encouragement to a young married couple, then he don't need to be counseling a woman by herself. Nobody needs to be counseling a woman by themselves. Let me make that clear as I can be. I specifically asked in the congregation that I work for to put a camera in my office so that if I'm ever in that situation where somebody just comes in on me, somebody can have some tape about what's going on in there. You see what I'm trying to say? You're trying to cover your base. But you see what I'm trying to say? At the same time, we will sit there and talk about, what does the word temperate mean? Most of the time we use that term to mean what? He can't drink, right? But there's more to temperance than just not drinking, right? He can't fly off the handle. In fact, that's what he's going to emphasize in the book of Titus. He can't be soon angry, okay, right? Well, obviously, temperate means more than just not drinking. Think about the idea of being sober-minded, good behavior, hospitable. This hospitality thing could make a difference when it comes to him not having a wife. Because let's also be honest about this. I can't be all that hospitable, but my wife helps me to be hospitable. So you see, you have to look at every one of these situations. Not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome. Have you ever met elders that argue? I've seen them. Okay, I don't mean to be ugly about it, but I've seen it. I'm just being honest, folks. We're dealing with folks that are called to live a Christian life, but a lot of times are what? They're struggling with it, just like everybody else is.
I don't think one person can do all the work in the church by himself. That's why I always believe in working with another preacher.
Right.
Or other people in the church. That's the way we can't do it all. There's one of us. It's got to be a connection.
Everybody has to be involved. Everybody. And again, a lot of folks are just happy to sit in the pews. You know, I don't mean to be ugly about this. Please don't. I'm getting on a soapbox and I'm trying to get back off, okay? But, and that song, I cannot remember the name of the song, but one of my brethren before says, he changed the song to say, sitting in the pews, we'll all go to heaven, sitting in the pews. No, we won't. No, there's more to Christianity than just that. So, as I said, 1 Timothy 3 becomes more disqualifications than qualifications. Titus 1. And so here you have a situation where these are men, elders, going back to Numbers chapter 11, these men are men that's going to be able to lead and help Moses not feel the burden by himself. I encourage everybody that's listening to me and everybody that will listen to me, please do what you can to help your preacher, to help the elders, not have to feel like they're doing it all on their own. And you need to take, sometimes you need to take some apart, or you need to take them aside and say, you can't do it all. God don't expect you to do it all. You need to do this. Now, I'm preaching a lot of this to myself, and I'm telling you because, again, some of you are preacher students, so I just want to encourage you to think about this. Listen, sometimes we want to go in there. Because I told you my background earlier, in the first congregation I worked for, there was a young girl that says, I'm just lazy and didn't do nothing. At the time, in that first congregation I worked for, this was my first work, I was learning how to be a preacher. I was preaching sermons. I was also going to school at Magnolia Bible College to finish up my coursework to get out of school. And my wife had our first son. And 6 months later, she had to have gallbladder surgery. So then, guess who had to take care of the son? Thank God that for her mother coming and helping, and I appreciated that so very, very much. But it's you see, I had a lot of burden on me. And then it felt to me like they were fussing at me because I wasn't doing everything that they thought I needed to be doing. When was I going to have the time? So I got discouraged. I only stayed there 2 years. And I felt like that I was just the only one trying to do anything. And a lot of congregations will let the preacher do everything. They expect him to do all the Bible classes they can, all the preaching they can, and to teach home Bible studies, as well as if you have a work day at church, the preacher better be there. You know what I'm trying to say? The preacher's job is to preach. The elder's job is to elder, to shepherd. And so Moses just feels like, I can't deal with this anymore. God helps us to see that it is our responsibility to do what we can to get everybody involved so that the burden doesn't just get on one person. That's why God said, get the 70 elders. And he says, I'm going to give them the Spirit. And before it's all over with, they're going to help you day by and day out. Moses at one time was actually trying to do all of the judging for all the children of Israel at the same time. And his father-in-law pulled him aside. What you're doing is not wise. You can't do this, Moses. So you have the responsibility to teach this to others, and then they have the responsibility to make those smaller judgment calls. If it's a major matter, then they'll bring it to you. So
here somehow they say the Lord transferred that spirit to us.
Isn't
that kind of interesting?
Yeah.
How do you?
I don't know.
Transfer that spirit.
Sometime, but again, and if you're looking in the New King James Version, the word spirit there is capitalized, which would suggest, and this is what they do in the New King James Version, is they always capitalize any reference they think is to the Holy Spirit. That may not be the Holy Spirit here. But a lot of times you will find that in a lot of, like I said, the King James and the New King James Version, you will see that word capitalized because they think it's talking about the Holy Spirit in that place. Now, could God have given this Holy Spirit? Part of the Holy Spirit, forgive me for that, I shouldn't have said that. But could God have given the Holy Spirit to all of them? Yeah. Does he give the Spirit to us today? Yeah. So how does he do that? We'll spend hours talking about that, won't we? But that's not what God wants. And so he did it for the purpose of trying to help Moses to realize you're not the only one, Moses. And so this is what he has got them to do. We've got a lot of lessons to learn here. Let's be honest about this. Moses displayed a lack of faith here, right? God, I can't handle these people. And God said, I'm not expecting you to handle these people. Not by yourself. God, I don't know what to do with all these folks and all these complaints I get at church. Well, listen, it's my church, Jesus says. I'm going to take care of this stuff. And sometimes Tommy tries to get in there and solve problems, and the tragedy of it is that Tommy makes a bigger mess of it. What a lesson. What a lesson. So, the people complain. He struggles with this. God chooses the 70, or these men choose the 70 elders. But this is not the end of the story here in Numbers chapter 11. We go on and look a little bit further, and we see how he says he's going to give them. He also promised them, because these one group of people complained, he emphasizes to them that I'm going to give you meat. You've been wanting meat? I'll give you meat. I'll give it to you. And he says, you have wept in the hearing of the Lord, saying, who will give us meat to eat? And you remember what Moses said earlier? He said, Lord, there's not enough. Shall flocks and herds be slaughtered for them? He said, to provide enough, or shall all the fish of the sea be gathered together? See, here's that lack of faith Moses was expressing. God had brought them out of Egypt with the 10 plagues, had delivered them at the Red Sea, had fed them the whole time they were at Mount Sinai, gave them water, gave them everything they needed, and now Moses is saying, God, how are we going to do all of this? How are you going to do all of this? What's Moses doing? And let me say this, I'm trying to encourage all of us. What usually happens when we get discouraged, we get focused on us. It's all about us, what we're feeling, what we're experiencing, the burdens we have. And the burdens are too great to bear. So what do? We feel like we're the only ones. That's what Moses was doing. Shall I kill all these animals? We can't. If we kill every one of these animals out here, that's not going to feed everybody. And notice what the Lord says. Has the Lord's arm been shortened? Now you will see whether or not what I say will happen to you or not. Is God incapable now, after delivering the children of Israel and taking care of them at Mount Sinai all this time, is God now incapable of taking care of these people? No. But you see, Moses thought it was all about him. You see the struggles? That's what happens in discouragement. You think about a fellow like Job. Did he get discouraged? Yeah. Was Jonah discouraged? Well, number one, he didn't want to do what God wanted to do anyway. And whenever, the only preacher I've ever heard of that converted an entire city goes up and gripes about it because he didn't want them to be converted. Because I know the kind of God you are. Was Jeremiah discouraged? Read Jeremiah 20. He says, I just decided I wasn't going to preach anymore, but your word is a fire in my heart, and I could not forbear. Everybody's going to get discouraged. When you're discouraged, you focus more on yourself. And what God is wanting us to do is say, look, folks, this is still my church. This is still my kingdom. I'm going to do what's best. I need you to do your part, but I don't need you to bear all the burdens because you can't. And we sing that song all the time. I must tell Jesus, I cannot what? Bear these burdens alone, right? But we try. We try. I guess I'm saying this to you so that you would encourage your preacher, your elders. These guys do the job day in and day out. And a lot of times they don't hear nothing but complaints. Let them know. Walk up to them and thank them for the job that they did. Also realize, and you know what I'm saying here, also realize they're men and they're going to make mistakes. So they're going to feel the weight of that. They're going to feel the weight of that to the point where they are wondering if they should quit. They're going to feel the weight of that to where they're wondering if it's really worth being an elder, if it's really worth being a deacon, if it's really worth being a preacher. And I hope I didn't use this as a gripe session, but I'm just using this to be honest. And I'm using this to share with you from my heart what I've been through. And it's tough. So the Bible says, we're now in verse 24, Moses went out and told the people the words of the Lord and gathered 70 men of the elders of the people and placed them around the tabernacle. The Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to him and took of the spirit that was upon him, placed upon the 70 elders, when the spirit rested upon them, that they prophesied, although they never did so again. Now, I don't know how many of us caught that. All right, did you catch it? Good. And what was the purpose of it? Think about in the New Testament. When God gave the gifts of the Holy Spirit to the apostles, they spoke in other tongues, but then you read in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, he gave them not only the ability to speak in tongues, but he also gave them the ability to prophesy, to heal the sick, all the things that we talk about in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. What was the purpose of the Spirit causing these 70 men to prophesy? The purpose was to prove that these men were accepted by God to do the job. Just as in the same manner on the day of Pentecost, he gave the Spirit to the 12, and as they began to preach in other tongues, that verified the message that they were preaching. In 1 Corinthians 12, as Paul would be able to pass on the miraculous gifts of the Spirit to the people of that day, what was the purpose of it? To prove to the people that Paul couldn't be in Corinth and stay in Corinth for the rest of his life. He had other places to go and other places, but what was the purpose? He left people there that had the ability, with the Spirit's help, to do the work that needed to be done to help that church to be what it needed to be. So that was the purpose of the Spirit. And this is another study that could take another semester, but the work of the Holy Spirit in redemption, going all the way back here from Exodus all the way through the Bible, you'll see that when the Spirit actually comes on people, they do miraculous gifts in an effort to prove that the message that they're preaching is the message from God himself. They have already seen Moses and know that Moses is what? Led by the Spirit, because he's the one talking with God and God's telling him what to do, and then all of a sudden the sea parts and the water comes out and all this manna comes. They know that he has it, but what about the 70? Are they going to trust the 70? Not unless they see some sort of miraculous interaction, and that's exactly what's happening here. So that's another study. As I said, this was a one-time thing to verify that God chose these men to help Moses in the task that he had to do. Let me also say this. If we're saying that there was anywhere from 1.5 to 3 million people in this, 70 men are still going to be stretched thin. Yeah, that's it. That's it. So they're going to be stretched thin. But you also had think about this, the priests that were to interpret and show them what the law meant, to actually offer the sacrifices that what we're studying, but it also became the priest's job to do the teaching of what they were to do. Go back to the book of Nehemiah, when they once again reestablished the walls of the city of Jerusalem, or actually started to rebuild the temple. The Levites were there, and they would spend an entire day, or at least a half a day, reading the scripture and going and telling the people what the scriptures meant. So that's the purpose of it. So they placed them there. You're right, they're still going to be stretched pretty thin. There were two of the guys that remained in the camp. The name of one was Eldad and the other was Medad, and the Spirit rested upon them. They didn't come to this assembly. And a lot of folks they question, well, was it because they didn't like Moses? There's some people that read that into the text. They didn't like Moses, so they just didn't even bother to come. But the Spirit still came upon them because they were chosen. I'm not going to go so far as to say that they didn't like Moses, because the Bible doesn't say anything about that. But it does seem like it, because we're going to read later in Numbers where you read of the rebellion of Korah. There were those that didn't like Moses and refused to do what Moses said. So some people make an extrapolation from the rebellion of Korah back here to this particular time. But they prophesied, if God, think about it this way, if they had been disobedient to come to where Moses was because they had a grudge against Moses, would God have given them the Spirit? I don't think he would have. You see what I'm trying to say? All righty. And then Moses, young man, ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad prophesying in the camp. So Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, one of his choice men, answered, Moses, my Lord, forbid them. I want you to turn to Mark 9. Mark chapter 9. Now, interestingly enough, Jesus is going to be in the mold of Moses. He's better than Moses, obviously, but Jesus is going to come and give the second law, the second command, or the New Testament, obviously. But as Jesus is out teaching, notice this. Mark chapter 9, verse 38. Now, John answered him, saying, Teacher, we saw someone who does not follow us casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him because he does not follow us. Everybody got Mark 9? Let me go ahead and Mark 9, 38. Mark 9, 38. Mark 9, 38. Now, this was during a time when Jesus obviously gave the Spirit to his disciples and sent them out on a time of unlimited commission to where they could do miracles. Okay? And we do know that on a few occasions the Bible does say that the disciples would cast out demons, right? That was even before Jesus died and they received the gift of the Holy Spirit.
John 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, yeah, like I said, well, they were performing miracles, so that had, and they were baptizing people as well.
Right. That's right.
So they had a baptism occurring before New Testament baptism.
They had a gift of the manifestation of the Spirit before they had
Before the Great Commission.
The Great Commission.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that gets you into another question that some people ask, well, were the disciples baptized again after Great Commission baptism was set up? I don't think so. I think John's baptism was fine. I don't think they had to be baptized again. Okay, because that was what God had said.
Because they said that baptism they were doing was for remission of sin.
For the remission of sin.
You would not get the kingdom if you didn't have that baptism.
Right.
Therefore, it must have been an essential baptism.
That's right. That's right.
And if it's essential, then it worked.
That's right.
And you didn't have to have it again.
That's exactly right. And that's the suggestion there that I'm firmly convinced they didn't have to be rebaptized in that situation. The difference between that and Acts 19 is after Jesus set up his commands, Apollos was still teaching John's baptism, not Jesus' baptism. And that's why he had to rebaptize the ones in Ephesus in Acts chapter 19. Yeah, because it was after the Great Commission baptism. So, all right. So we're back at Mark chapter 9, verse 38. Teacher, we saw someone who does not follow us casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him because he does not follow us. I think Jesus had a lot of other disciples. Well, I know that he had 70, right? And we only talk about the 12 more often than not, but we know he had the 70 because they sent them out 2 by 2, according to the book of Luke. So he says, we forbade him because he does not follow us. And Jesus said, do not forbid him, for no one who works a miracle in my name can soon afterwards speak evil of me. He who is not against us is on our side. Whoever gives a cup of water to drink in my name because you belong to Christ, I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. I believe, again, Jesus gave these miraculous gifts to others besides just the apostles. But that's at that time. And he's still giving them this. I believe he gave it to the 70. And this particular guy may have been one of the 70. May very well have been the case. But what did John want to do? Huh? John, no, he's not with us, so he can't do that anymore. You see the point? And you see it's kind of the same thing that's going on here in Numbers chapter 11. Eldad and Medad weren't with the rest of these guys, so they shouldn't be over there prophesying in the midst of the congregation when they should have been over here. And Moses said, no, and God gives the Spirit to them as well. Brother? Just the 12. That's exactly right. So, going back to Numbers 11, Eldad and Medad, and again, what was it Joshua said? My Lord forbid them. What was it that John said? Lord forbid them, right? Isn't it interesting as you look at this and as it plays out a little bit, how what happens whenever Moses gave the Old Testament law in the Old Testament, the Spirit came there on the 70 as well. And there were brethren, Joshua specifically, who says, Eldad and Medad can't do that because they weren't with us. So Jesus comes, he's teaching his disciples, plus the 70 as well, think about that. And now John comes up and says, Lord, tell him to stop doing that because he's not following us. Isn't it interesting, the parallels between those situations? And there's a lot of other parallels besides this, with the Mosaic, giving of the Mosaic law, as well as the giving of the New Testament of Christ. So, back in Numbers 11, the Lord came down in the clouds, spoke to him, took of the Spirit that was upon him, placed the same upon the 70 elders. And it happened, notice the word elders there. Here's the word elders in the New King James Version. Numbers chapter 11, verse 25. And it happened when the Spirit rested upon them, though they prophesied, they did not do so again. And so he says, he and the elders of Israel had actually come back. The Lord put his Spirit upon them. Are you zealous for my sake? Oh, that all the Lord's people were prophets, and the Lord would put his Spirit upon them. And then you think about the fact how in the New Testament we've been promised the Spirit, right? We shall receive the gift of the Holy Spirit, Acts 2:38. Now we get into the discussion, is it miraculous or non-miraculous? In the first century, we know that Acts chapter 8 teaches that the only way it was miraculous is if they had been one of the 12, with the exception of Judas, because Judas did not receive the Spirit in a miraculous way because of what had happened. He went out and hung himself. Remember that? So then it seems like when you read Acts chapter 8, Peter and John were laying hands on people, and they also passed on the gifts of the Spirit. So that's how they were able in a lot of situations to do that. And that also comes into the play of Acts chapter 19 with the Ephesians and Barnabas and so forth. So was Barnabas able to perform miracles? I'm not exactly sure, but Paul obviously had blessed him to be able to be a preacher and so forth. So that's something else to key in on. And that's another study for another class. But anyway, all righty. So he says, and he returned to the camp. And isn't it interesting? Think about this in this respect. Moses said to him, are you zealous for my sake? Oh, that all the Lord's people were prophets and the Lord would put his Spirit upon them. While we may not prophesy today, we do have the Spirit with us, don't we? We do. And so that's a challenge and something to think about. Okay.
There's a thought of the Levites were priests.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not all Levites were priests, but
right.
priests came out of Levites.
Right.
And so it was a very big thing to be a priest.
Mm-hmm.
Be very responsible.
That's right.
If a priest didn't do his priestly duty, that would have been terrible.
That's exactly right. They had to do that.
In the New Testament, all Christians are priests.
Right.
So all Christians have to do our duty, just the same as these people in the Old Testament, the Levites, had to do their duty.
That's exactly right.
So if we're doing our duty, we are going to support totally the work of the Lord. We have to think of ourselves as, when I come to church, I'm coming to church, talking about the assembly, not the building.
Yeah.
I come to church not because I have an obligation not to forsake the assembly. I come to church because I am a priest and I've got work to do.
That's exactly right. And that ought to be our attitude. It really ought to.
We're coming to do business.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Let's take about a 5-minute break. Started back. Okay, we are still in Numbers chapter 11. We haven't got much further than the class when we ended last week, but we go on. Verse 31 is talking about how the Lord sent quail to the children of Israel. Quail. Remember earlier Moses had said, Lord, are there enough fish in the sea, flocks and herds to provide enough for them? So again, this kind of reinforces the thing we've been saying all along, and that's the idea of how many people there were here in the children of Israel. So a man went out, the Bible says, from the Lord, and it brought quail from the sea and left them fluttering near the camp. Some people suggest the idea that it was about a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on the other side, and they were flying up maybe about 2 cubits above the surface of the ground. Now, if you've ever hunted quail, and I have, they always go more than 2 cubits. So obviously God sent this quail over here, and 2 cubits would be about 3 feet. All righty. So if you're trying to catch the quail to eat them, it's not going to be a problem because they're not going to fly off on you. They're just going to be scattering, you know. So that's the ideal of what he's doing here. And so they stayed up all that day, all night, and all the next day, and gathered the quail and spread them out for themselves all around the camp. Now, probably what they did at this time was pluck their feathers, maybe skin them, chop the meat up, maybe mixed a little salt on it, and maybe made some bird jerky. You know what I'm trying to say? Left it out in the sun, let it just dry up, and they start eating it a little bit. That's the way they would eat a lot of fish at that time. And you got to remember, these people had come from Egypt, so they did a lot of fishing. So that's one of the ways that they would preserve the meat. So they're doing the same thing. And so they spread them out all around the camp. Again, Herodotus suggested this ideal in his book, Raw, but you put this out on where they could be, the sun could dry them out, put a little bit of salt on it. And the Bible says when the meat was still between their teeth, before it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord rose against the people, and he struck the people with a very great plague. They had to pay for their complaining. We have to pay for ours. God hadn't changed. And the Apostle Paul would reference this ideal in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. He referenced this very same incident in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And this is, again, part of the reason why I love teaching the Old Testament and coming over to the New Testament. So we see here the idea, let's see, yeah. Notice 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, with most of them God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Remember, we're going to see about the results of that from Numbers later. He says, these became our examples to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they lusted. Do not become idolaters as some of them. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. That happened in Exodus 34. And that's where he's quoting from, whenever they fell down before the golden calf. Nor let us commit sexual immorality as some of them did. And one day, 23,000 fell. We will read about this in the latter part of the book of Numbers, whenever the Midianite women were encouraged to sleep with the Israelite men. And that caused God to punish them. He says, nor let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed by serpents. And then here's verse 10, nor complain, as some of them also complained and were destroyed by the destroyer. They wanted something to eat besides the manna. God gave them something, but at the same time, he brought about a punishment upon those. And I'd like to think that maybe the worst punishment came upon the mixed company that had started the whole complaint. Think about the idea a lot of times when one person starts complaining, what happens? Everybody's got something to complain about, right? Well, you're complaining about this, but let me tell you how I feel about this, right? We are in a season of complaints. It's called the election season. I don't mean to be ugly about that, but I'm being honest. We are in a season of complaining, right? And so one party's going to make the other party look bad simply because they're trying to gain votes, right? Scare tactics, but also complaining. All right. So this name of the place was called Kibroth Hatava. That word means graves of craving. You're craving this, you're going to crave all the way to your grave with it. You're going to die from it. So that's what happened because they.
Does this apply to not everybody was complaining, just those who died were complaining?
It seems to suggest that. Mm-hmm. And you've also got to think about, how it is with gossip or backbiting or some of these other things. One person starts it, then everybody's going to do it. Maybe God saw it as it was beginning and tried to get this thing going on at that particular time to where or maybe he also was using this as a test for the children of Israel. Complaining shows a lack of faith. Period. I mean, that's just all there is to it. And we justify it. We try to say, well, it's not that bad. Think about this idea. All up to this time, God had blessed them, had fed them, had watered them. They had offered all these sacrifices and everything, but their flocks were still multiplying. I mean, they had everything that they could have needed, but they weren't happy. You know, well, we eat the same thing day in and day out. Well, at least you got something to eat day in and day out. It all depends upon our attitude. And I think that's a very, very, very important thing. Think about some of the complaints in the Lord's church. It's too cold. It's too hot. Find the place in the building where you can sit where it's neither one. I can't hear the preacher. He talks too soft. I don't like that preacher. He yells at us. I don't like what the elders decided here. I mean, we think we've got the right to complain about everything. If God did the same thing to us today, where would we be? It's just there's some great lessons here. Complaining suggests the idea of a lack of faith. It suggests the idea of not being happy with the circumstances that you have. But let's also be honest about this. Where does it get us? I mean, who likes to listen to somebody who's always complaining? You see somebody coming into the church and you know she's sister so-and-so and you love her to death, but you know what? She ain't got one good thing to say about anybody. So what do you kind of do? You see her walk in, so you're walking the other way. I mean, I don't mean to be ugly about that, but do we do it? Do this. You know we do it. You know we do it because we just don't want to hear it. If we get that aggravated listening to it, think about how God must get aggravated with us. So this is another one of those sins of the tongue that we don't hear a lot about, but it's something that here in this situation, they paid, and they paid dearly for it. Did they not? All right, we're going on to chapter 12. Finally, got out of chapter 11. And again, I spent an hour and a long time, about an hour and a half on chapter 11, but there was so much in here. I hope I haven't bored you. I hope I haven't frustrated you. But again, there's just so much here to look at in just that one chapter. It's interesting. You got to remember, as Moses is writing this, he did not break it down into chapters and verses. Okay. Right after this whole thing happened with the complaining and Moses' complaint to God because he couldn't handle this anymore. Now you have Miriam, and after the selection of the 70 elders to help take the place, now you have Miriam and Aaron complaining about Moses. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. Now, as we just read that and we don't think a lot about it, we have to realize some things are happening here. Number one, in some Bible translations, this is translated not an Ethiopian woman, but a Cushite woman. Habakkuk chapter 3 at verse 7 would say that Moses had married a Cushite woman. So that brings us to a lot of questions. Did his wife die and he marries somebody of the mixed company from the camp, a Cushite woman? Or was,
We're part of the Jews. Cushite's part of the Jews.
Not really. I mean, they were still, we all came from Adam and Eve. There was going to be some similarities, but I don't know that the Cushites were a part of the Jewish nation. I do not believe so. Some people believe that Zipporah was the Cushite woman. Okay. Because they would have included the area around Cush, which may very well have included Midian. And of course, we know she was a Midianite woman. So the bottom line is we don't know exactly. maybe they were finally complaining about their sister-in-law. Family problems. Now, in the whole family dynamic, who was the oldest? Miriam, Aaron, or Moses? Miriam was. Miriam had to be, because she was the one staying at the Nile River when the babe was thrown in. Aaron was 3 years older than Moses. He wasn't there standing at the river. She had to be, so she had to be the oldest. Some people may have suggested that she may have been 6 years older, so I don't know. I don't know if the Bible, I had to go back and look at that. I don't know if the Bible's actually clear on her age or not. But we do know that Aaron was 3 years older than his brother. So she was the oldest. And Aaron and Midian had not been chosen to be part of the 70 that's going to help take care of everything. It seems to suggest, as you're reading the context, that Miriam was the one doing the complaining because she was the first one mentioned. Okay? And so they said, in essence, now they were upset because he had married this Ethiopian or Cushite woman. And so now they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. Now, we read about Miriam back in Exodus with the deliverance of the child, Moses. But we also read about Miriam whenever the children of Israel had been saved from the Red Sea. We remember that the children of Israel, and as you read the song in Exodus, let me see if I can find it very quickly. There's a song in Exodus. Hold on a second. I want to say it's Exodus 15. It is. I'm right. Whew. I'm glad I remember that one. It's called the Song of Moses. And if you read this song, in the Hebrew, it's called Shavat Hayam. And it emphasizes the idea of how God had delivered the children of Israel through the plagues. And then not the plagues, but the Moses. In verse 20 of Exodus 15, and Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, now notice she's a prophetess, took the timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out with her with timbrels and with dances. And Miriam said, sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider has thrown into the sea. When I taught this in the book of Exodus, this is a great song, and I could spend another hour on this song, but I've already taught that in the book of Exodus last semester. But this particular song may have been a responsive song. And I mean by that is the men would sing one part and the women would sing another. Kind of like A Beautiful Life. Each day I'll do, and then the ladies repeat it. And I think as you look at the stanzas of this song in Exodus chapter 15, that very well be that Miriam was taking the women and singing responsively to the men in this song of Moses. So she had felt like she was a prophetess, the Bible says. So obviously she had been inspired. And she also, think about it in this respect, she's probably, you might say, the one kind of helping the women to do what they need to be doing in all of this. They would be the ones that more than just feeding people, but she would be the one, hopefully, that would encourage the ladies to do what they could to encourage their men. All righty? So she's upset. Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? Now, I want you to think about this. Aaron has now become the high priest. Moses is the leader of the people. Miriam is, well, from what we read in Exodus 15, it seems like she led the women, trying to help the women spiritually. Okay? And she was upset. And has he not spoken through us also? There's not this attitude of submissiveness here. It's kind of like we're on the same terms as he is, and God has to teach her a hard lesson. So the man Moses was very humble, more than all the men who were on the face of the earth. The word humble meant, from that Hebrew word, can mean to hide the face. So suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out, you three, to the tabernacle of meeting. Every time as I was reading this and preparing for this, I kept thinking about the time when my dad would call me out to come somewhere. I knew it was not going to turn out good that day. No matter what happened, I knew it was not going to turn out good. And I could just imagine must have been going through Miriam and Moses and Aaron's mind all at the same time. So come out, you three. We're going to talk about this. And the Lord came down in the pillar of cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both went forward. He said, hear now my words. If there's a prophet among you, I make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. Not so with Moses. He says, he is faithful in all my house. I speak with him face to face, even plainly. Now let's stop there and let's talk about that idea a moment. We know in another passage of scripture that God told him earlier back in Exodus 34. He said, you cannot see my face. But here he says, I speak with him face to face. So is there a contradiction there in the Bible? No. It's more the idea that, again, in Exodus 34, he says, I am so holy that you would die if you saw my face. And I don't want you to die. But when he talks about speaking face to face, he's not talking through the spirit that might have, word I'm looking for, might have inspired a prophetess or a prophet. God actually talked to Moses. Just like Adam and Eve would talk to God, okay? So it's not Moses actually seeing God's face, but it's a Hebraism that suggests the idea, look, we're talking just like you and I are talking right now. I'm not telling the Spirit what to tell the prophet. I'm talking to Moses, just like he's right here. So I don't think there's a contradiction there at all. He says, even plainly, I don't speak in dark sayings, and he sees the form of the Lord. Notice he sees the form of the Lord. He didn't see the Lord, right? He sees the form of the Lord. Why then are you afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Whoo! Moses is just standing there in the midst of all of this, and the anger of the Lord was aroused against them, and he departed. They were complaining about Moses' wife, so here's this complaining ideal again, right? And being maybe different than they are. So the cloud departed from them both the tabernacle, and suddenly Miriam became what? Leprous, and the Bible says as white as snow. Now, again, if you're looking at that in the New King James Version, white as is in italics, which suggests the idea as that this is something that the translators had put in there. But it makes sense without it. Miriam leprous as snow. That's how it would read in the Hebrew. Miriam was leprous as snow. So you don't need the white as snow. Her skin color changed. Some commentators suggest the idea that happened because they were complaining about the dark-skinned woman Moses had married, and so Miriam is what? Drained of all color whatsoever because she's now become leprous. And so Aaron turned toward Miriam, and there she was, a leper. Now we have to ask the question, why didn't God do something to Aaron? And this is why a lot of commentators suggest the idea that God was angry with Miriam because she was the one instigating it all. Number one, it mentions, first of all, Miriam and Aaron, not Aaron and Miriam, Miriam and Aaron. And secondly, she is the one that gets punished. And so what does she do? What does Aaron do? Oh, my Lord, please do not lay this sin on us in which we've done foolishly and in which we have sinned. Now, remember, Aaron is the what? High priest. So he could talk with the Lord in that respect. And again, you've got to ask the question, is Aaron repentant here? I believe he is. If I seen somebody just stricken this way at that moment in time, I'd be thinking, oh, I've messed up too. Lord, please, I'm sorry. Do not let her be as one of those who dead, whose flesh is half consumed when it comes out of his mother's womb. And Moses cried out to the Lord, heal her, O God, I pray. Prayer saved her life, as she had saved Moses' life. That's another thing I love about the Bible. It always kind of brings things full circle. She had a hand in saving Moses' life. Now Moses has a hand in saving her life. So it's interesting along that line. Then the Lord said to Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, would she not be shamed 7 days? Now we should think to ourselves, boy, that's pretty rough. Parents spit in their face, but it is. And obviously it was something that they did at that time to punish their children. To be a spit in the face, how would we all feel if we got spit in the face? I mean, you know, us men, we'd automatically think, what? It's on now, guys. It's on now. Think about that whenever Jesus took that spit at the cross. Think about that when he took that spit at the cross.
I was in a debate one time, and I don't remember the other guy's name, but he deliberately come up and spit in Roy Deaver's face.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to get off the platform because I was ready to fight for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I heard of another preacher that had been spit in the face when people was coming out the door. And he reached in and grabbed his handkerchief, and he looked at the lady who spit in his face and said, I hope the Lord washed your sins away as easy as it is for me to wipe away this spit.
Great answer.
You know, so I don't know how that would take that's tough whenever you're dealing with that situation at that point in time. This was a way to emphasize to the child to be punished. And again, she would be shamed. So let her be shut out of this camp for 7 days, and afterwards she may be received again. And so again, they wait. They wait for her. They wait for her outside the camp. Think about how Deuteronomy 25, verse 9. Let's look at that passage very quickly. I jotted it down. I can't remember exactly what it says. It's a good thing to look it up anyway. Deuteronomy 25, verse 9. I hope I got it right. Yeah. When it comes to the marriage duty of this, you remember the Levirate marriage law. His brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, spit in his face, and answer to him, so shall it be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. So we understand, even back then, it was a mark of shame to be spit on. And so that's the point that we're seeing here. She has shamed herself by this action. So they shut her outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not journey till Miriam was brought in again. And afterward, the people moved from Hazeroth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. Now, if you would go to Numbers chapter 20, verse 1. Numbers chapter 20, verse 1. The children of Israel, the whole congregation, went into the wilderness of Zin in the first month that the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. So this was sometime later. A lot of things are going to take place from what we read here in chapter 12 through chapter 20. But here is also, interestingly enough, at Kadesh, where Moses makes his mistake, where he strikes the rock and shall we deliver you water, you rebels, instead of giving the glory to God. So it's kind of interesting again how this thing is going back full circle. Miriam saved Moses. Moses saved Miriam by praying. Miriam dies. Now Moses is sentenced to death, as it was, without entering the land of Canaan. So a lot of this goes on throughout the Bible. Kind of look for that whenever you're looking through it. All righty. And that's the end of that. Now, chapter 13 and 14. Another big section of this passage in the book of Numbers deals with this situation here. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I'm given to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, everyone a leader among them. Now, this story is also going to be told in the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 1 at verse 22, I believe. Let me look at that and make sure. Deuteronomy chapter 1 at verse 22. 9:23. Let me look at 9:23 first. This becomes a watershed moment. Yeah. In chapter 9 of Deuteronomy, you have the Israel. It seems like Moses is preaching his last three sermons. And he says, no, this is all you guys did wrong. You got to be told that sometimes just to be reminded of it. And so in 9:23, the Lord sent you from Kadesh Barnea, go up and possess the land, but then you rebelled against the commandment of the Lord your God, and you did not believe him nor obey his voice. You have been rebellious against the Lord from the day that I knew you, Moses says. Boy, that's some tough preaching there, isn't it? Get up there and really start saying that, and so he says, I prayed 40 days and 40 nights so that because the Lord said he would destroy you. And I prayed to the Lord saying, do not destroy your people, your inheritance, whom you have redeemed. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And lest the land from which you brought us should say, because the Lord was not able to bring them to the land. So he's recording again in Deuteronomy 9 what's happening here in Numbers chapter 13 and 14. This becomes a watershed moment. They are now ready to take the land of Canaan. They have been at Sinai. They had received the laws. They had instituted the worship. Now they have traveled to the point to where they can start taking the land, except, and we all know the rest of this story, where the 10 spies bring back the bad report. You start looking at the various leaders of the tribes. Shemua is the tribe of Reuben. Simeon is Shaphat. Caleb is of the tribe of Judah. Caleb is of the tribe of Judah. This is extremely interesting because, again, we go back to Genesis 49 and remember the promises that Jacob had made to his sons, and it's going to be out of Judah. The Christ is going to come. From the tribe of Ishkar, Igal. From the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea. Hoshea is another name for who? Hoshea is another name for Joshua. Joshua. Okay? So who are the two spies who's going to come back with a good report? Caleb and Joshua. The guy that's the leader of Judah and the guy that's the leader of Ephraim. And Judah and Ephraim are going to have a big role to play through the rest of the Bible when it comes to the divided kingdom. Ephraim is going to be, in essence, the leaders of the children of Israel, the 10 northern tribes. Judah is going to be the leader of the 2 southern tribes. So there's that play there. So we go on through the names there of all of them. I'm not expecting you to memorize the names. I'm not going to, okay? If I need to know, I know where to come to get it. So that's what's important about that. All righty. Here's the men, the names of the men who Moses sent to spy out. And the word spy out there suggests the ideal of looking, of searching, of secretly searching is more the idea there. And he called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua. And he sent him to spy out the land. Go up this way into the south. Go into the mountains. See what the land is like. Whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many. Whether the land they dwell in is good or bad. The cities they inhabit are like camps or stronghold. Whether the land is rich or poor. Whether there are forests, be of good courage. In other words, tell us everything. Tell us about it militarily. Tell us about the crops. Tell us about whether there's going to be wood to make fires, to make houses, to do whatever else we need to do. Is the land rich or poor? Whatever. And bring some of the fruit of the land. It was the time of the first grapes of the season. I'm going to tell you, as being growing up on a farm, the first fruits of a garden, the first fruits of whatever are always the best. They are always the first tomato and the first tomato sandwich. You can't beat it. I'm sorry. You just can't beat it. So here's the thing. It was a time of the first ripe grapes. So they went into the land and they spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob. Rehob, from what I've seen in the maps, and again, a lot of these places we're going to have problems with definitely identifying because They're gone. They've been gone. They're under the sands. But most of the people, the Rehob, so it would talk about the wilderness of Zin would be down at the bottom, and Rehob would be up close to where the land of Samaria would be later on. All righty. So they've got all of that land there. They went up through the south, came to Hebron. Hebron's going to be a very important place later. David is going to camp out at Hebron when he's fleeing from Saul. See, that's a whole nother study you can spend time on, is look at these cities and see what happened in each one of these cities and how God intervened there. A lot of people say, well, I'm running out of places or things to preach about. There's so many things to preach about, so many ways to go with this stuff, you know. So he said they came to the valley of Eshcol, and there cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes and had to carry it between two of them on a pole. That, I'd love to see that grape cluster. I'm telling you what, it was so big they had to carry it on a pole. They brought some of the pomegranates and figs. This was called the valley of Eshcol cluster, because of the cluster which the men of Israel cut down. So Eshcol means cluster. And they returned from spying out the land 40 days. Man, this is what they've been looking forward to. This is what they've been wanting all this time, to get to the promised land. And surely they did not think that this was just going to be an easy stroll in the park and go in there and that was going to be the end of it. No, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to have to happen before they actually take the land. So they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back to word to them and all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they said, now here's where it starts. Here we go. We went to the land where you sent us. It is everything God said it was. It truly flows. It has an abundance of food with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. But, now if you're reading from the New King James, it says nevertheless. But anytime you hear the word but or nevertheless, it's like, uh-oh. You know, man, this is everything God had said it would be, but let me tell you something. It's not going to be as easy to take as we think it is, okay? The land and people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified. They're very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. Again, another great study would be, if we had the time, to look at each one of the groups of people. Amalek was a descendant of Abraham through his wife Keturah. Also, Amalek is also the descendant. There's another guy named Amalek in the book of Genesis. So the question is this still a descendant of Abraham that's going to wind up attacking the children of Israel? May very well be. And in actuality, we're going to see that if you read through the rest of it, it's going to be David that finally puts the Amaleks down for the last time. And so you're talking about a long war for many centuries that goes on here. The Hittites, the Jebusites, thing to remember about the Jebusites, that's the ones that's in charge of Jerusalem. Jerusalem would be Jebusalem. So Jebusites are from Jerusalem. The Amorites, the Canaanites. And so they said they're large and very large, the descendants of Anak. Now the descendants of Anak, as I've said before, may very well be some of the descendants of the people of the flood, before the flood. Of course, we know that all of that was washed away until whenever Noah went into the ark. Let me get that straight. But they may very well be the descendants, and we remember this may very well be where some of the giants came from, like Goliath. And Goliath had a brother that was that way as well. So there were still giants at the time of David, all right? Caleb quieted the people. He said, and I love Caleb here. I love his faith. He said, now this is what we saw. It's everything God said it was going to be, but it's going to be tough defeating them. No, they didn't even say that. They're saying in essence, we ain't got a chance. And Caleb said, oh, but let us go up at once to take possession, for we're well able to overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we're not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we've gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it, men of stature. We got to fight giants to do this. And we saw the giants, and again, the word giants here is the word Nephilim, and that's where they suggest that. The descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like what? Grasshoppers in their sight. And so we were in their sight. In other words, we can't beat these people. All that Moses has led us to do, that whole time he was in Mount Sinai and talking about giving us this land, we can't do this. We're like grasshoppers. We can't do this. How many times have you been rearing children and your child says, I can't do this. And you help them and you guide them. And finally they're doing it, right? I can't ride a bike. I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. And lo and behold, they do it, right? Attitude makes all the difference. If you think you're a grasshopper and all those guys out there are giants, you're going to sit back. The battle is lost because you give up already. And that's their problem. So the 10 spies, all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. We got out of Egypt just to go try to take this land that we're not going to be able to take because it's got a bunch of giants there. And they cry and they complain against Moses and Aaron. And here's that word complained again. Here's that word again. It don't take much to go from one complaint to another. Amen? Because there's always something. This year we've had more than our opportunity of complaining. First it was COVID. Then it was what? Race. And then it's, are we ever going to get out of it? And now it's politics, right? How many of you have had it up to here with it all? I have. I'm just done with it. I'm just done with the whole thing. Now I'm done my rant, okay? I'm done my complaining. And Lord, please forgive me, okay? The bottom line is, why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? You brought us out here to die, Moses. Our wives and our children are going to become victims. And we don't know why you brought us out here. And it's like God is sitting there listening in heaven saying, haven't I taken care of you every step of the way? Don't you think I'm going to help you? I did not say this was going to be a walk in the park, guys. Anything that we have to do that's worth the gain is going to be tough. I mean, that's all there is to it. So it'd be better for us to go back to Egypt. Well, guys, you knew what you had back in Egypt. You knew the slavery, you know how bad it was. You'd rather go back there than to take a chance on this. And more often than not, maybe we all have that attitude. I can't do that. It's just too big. I can't deal with this situation. I can't deal with this pandemic. I can't. And again, what's happened? We've forgotten God. We're relying too much on ourselves. And we say it can't be done. And if we're all honest, we have to say we've been in those shoes. We really have. Moses and Aaron fell on their face before all the assembly. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, they tore their clothes and they spoke. The land we passed through to spy out is an exceeding good land. It's everything God said it would be. And if the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land. It's a land which flows with milk and honey. Do not rebel against the Lord. Don't fear the people of the land. We're going to eat them up. They are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. And the congregation said, take those two boys out and stone them right now. You know, that's the way they were. And now all of a sudden the glory of the Lord appears in the tabernacle of meeting before all the children of Israel. God was waiting for them to say their words. And he said, okay, now it's my turn to speak. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people reject me? How long will these people reject me? Just in another translation of that, how long will these people despise me? With all the miracles that I've done among them, I'm going to strike them with pestilence. I will disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they, Moses. Just stand back. Let me have at them. Here is where we see Moses' heart for these people. He has listened to their complaining. He had complained himself. We saw in chapter 11, right? I can't deal with this anymore, Lord. And now what does he do? He pleads to the Lord. And notice he has developed such a relationship with God that he can be honest with God. And listen, that's something to be said about all of us. When we're talking to the Lord, we need to be honest in our prayers. He already knows what we're going through. He already knows what we're thinking. So he said, then the Egyptians will hear it. For by your might you brought these people up from among them, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of the land. And they have heard that you are among these people, that you, Lord, are seen face to face, and your cloud stands above them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. If you kill these people as one man, then the nations which have heard of your fame will speak, saying, because the Lord was not able to bring his people into the land which he swore to give them, he killed them in the wilderness. And now I pray, let the power of my Lord be great, just as you have spoken. And listen, I love this. I love this. Let the power of my Lord be great when you spoke, saying, the Lord is long-suffering and abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, but he by no means clears the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation. Now, what is Moses doing here? Moses is quoting Bible to him, to God. When did God tell them this before? Right after the golden calf, Exodus 34. And he said, this is the way I want you to know me. And by the way, brothers and sisters, or brothers, this is a great, great, great lesson. This passage from Exodus 34, quoted here in Numbers chapter 14, where the children of Israel, let me read Exodus 34, 6 and 7, because this is where it's found. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sins, by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. This passage is quoted again in Nehemiah 9:17, in Psalms 103:3, and there's about 5 other places in the Bible. This becomes and I taught this in the book of Exodus class, I'm trying to emphasize it again. God wants his people to know this is who he is. They had just committed the sin with a golden calf. And we see that Moses is making the new tablets, and in that whole situation there, he renews the covenant. But God renews the covenant, and he said, this is what I want you to know about me. And brothers, this is vital. This is vital. If we can get this in Exodus and every other passage as we look through it in Scripture, we'll keep seeing that God constantly tells people, this is who I am. This is my character. And this will preach. And this is something we need to be preaching. because it finds its ultimate fruition in Jesus. Everything said here could be said about Jesus. Listen, I'm Yahweh, Yahweh Elohim. That's Hebrew saying, I am the Lord God. Yahweh is the Hebrew word which suggests a personal God. I want to have a personal relationship with you. And a lot of times it's translated Jehovah. Okay? Elohim suggests the God of Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God, Elohim. God, what did he do in the beginning? He created the heavens and the earth. He's not only a God that creates, but he is a God that wants a personal relationship with his people. Now, what does he say about himself? I'm merciful. I'm gracious. We would not be here tonight discussing this if it were not for God's grace. Amen. I mean, I'm being honest here. We would not be here. Is God merciful to us? Yes. If God struck us dead the moment we did something wrong, there wouldn't be a planet here anymore. I mean, that's just all there is to it. If God struck a nation down the first time it didn't do what he wanted, there wouldn't be no nations upon the face of the earth anymore. He said, I want you to know me as merciful and gracious. He said, I want you to know me as a long-suffering God. In the Hebrew, this word means long-nosed. In other words, I have to look past a lot. I have to put up with a lot. I have to look past a lot of stuff to see you. I'm long-suffering with you. And I'm abounding in goodness and truth. So as you're looking at these words, what does he want you to know him for? He's a merciful, gracious, long-suffering, very patient God, abounding in goodness and truth. I keep mercy for thousands. I am a forgiving God, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but by no means clearing the guilty. What does that mean? Well, we're all guilty, right? Boy, we've all sinned, fallen short of God's glory, but what does he mean? I think he's talking about a person here who just continues in sin without any respect of who God is. And he says, visiting the iniquity of the father upon the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. This is where a lot of people get the idea that sin is inherited, that God causes the mother and parents of the father to have a child, but that child inherits the sin of their mother and father. That is not the case. Ezekiel 18 makes that as clear as it can possibly be. That doctrine of original sin and inherited sin is a false doctrine. Ezekiel 18 makes that 100% clear. But what he is talking about, and we have to look at it from the idea, is that the children will still have to bear the consequences of their father's actions. Right? They will not bear the father's sin, but they may have to bear the consequences of the father's actions. We see that today. A mother drinks the whole time she's carrying a child, and the baby is born with fetal alcohol syndrome. The child has to suffer for the sins of the mother. But the child does not have the mother's sins. Okay? Driving home tonight, God forbid, somebody may be driving on the wrong side of the road because he's drunk and hit me. Right? That does not mean I have to bear the consequences of that man's sin, but I'm not bearing that man's sin. I have to bear the consequences of that sin. That's two different things. And so many people lose sight of that idea. And that's what he's talking about here in Exodus. Now, what's interesting about this, in Exodus 34, he reveals himself right after the incident with the golden calf. And he renews the covenant here in Exodus 34. It has not been that long between that and here. We're talking about a little over a year from the situation with the golden calf at Mount Sinai to them leaving and going up the land. So you're talking about a little less than a year. And so as Moses intercedes for the people, what does he say to God? What is he emphasizing to God? God, you're long-suffering. You're abundant in mercy. You forgive iniquity and transgression, but you by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation. God, what you told us back then, whenever we sinned against you then, you told us that you're not a God that's going to punish. You're a God that is long-suffering, merciful, and gracious. And I can understand, Moses could understand, I can understand, Lord, you being upset. I was upset with him earlier, remember? I've had it up to here with him. Lord, I can understand it, but God, number one, don't kill these people because the Egyptians are going to say you couldn't do it, even though you delivered them from Egypt. And all the people will condemn you for who you are. Another great study to spend some time on is how does God feel about his name? We know that you're not to take the name of the Lord your God in vain, but a person's name represents who they are. So if somebody calls me Tommy, then I respond to that name, but that name also means something to you in that you think about me as a teacher, a preacher, whatever else you know about me. So that's why God is so jealous for his name. His name represents all of the characteristics that he has just identified in Exodus 34 and been repeated by Moses here in Numbers chapter 14. So Moses, what is he doing? God, pardon the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of your mercy, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt until now. I love this chapter. I love Moses' response. God said, get out of my way, Moses. I'll make of you a great nation. And if Moses was lifted up with pride, he could have stepped out of the way and God could have started all over again, but he didn't. He pleaded on Israel's behalf. Now, one of the great things about Moses, and this is another great lesson, Moses gave the law, Jesus gave the law. What did Moses do? On more than one occasion, Moses steps in between God and the people and he saves them. Literally. He saves them by these prayers. What did Jesus do? He stepped in between God and man and saves us and continues to save us. So you see, there's just so many wonderful parallels here that we could just milk all day long, but we got to go on. And I love this passage because it emphasizes that. So he says, I pardon them, pardon the iniquity, I pray, according to the greatness of this mercy, just as you have already forgiven these people. Lord, this is just another one of their sins and all they've done. You have forgiven them up till now. Please continue to forgive them. And where would we be if God stopped? It would all be over, folks. And I love verse 20. The Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word. Somebody want to say something? I'm sorry. No? Okay. But truly as I live, the Lord says, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. He said, and this is something that's very important. We have to magnify his name because it represents who he is. But God is also very concerned for his glory. He is concerned that men do not give him the glory that he deserves. So he says, all these men who have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt in the wilderness, and they put me to the death these 10 times and have not listened to me, they certainly shall not see the land of which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it. In other words, this generation is going to die. And they're going to die in the wilderness because they have not had enough faith in me. What's the lesson for us, folks?
It turned over to reprobate mind.
Yeah, Romans 1, we don't want to become reprobate, obviously. Faith is vital. And when we complain all the time, and whenever we're sitting back wondering if God's in charge, and when we're sitting back thinking about how could God, a loving, just God, allow us to do this, it's because God is loving and God is just that he's allowing this. Whatever we go through, he's loving enough to allow us to deal with the choices that we have to make. He's just allowing us to deal with the consequences of our choices. And the ultimate, sadly, judgment is going to be eternal separation from God, because we maybe have not given him the glory, because we have not obeyed his word. I love what, again, God says here, I have pardoned according to your word. God is a God that wants to pardon. God is a God that wants to save. God is a God that does not want to see any of his human creation perish. If we perish, it will be because it is our choice. So we can't sit back and say a just and loving God is just wanting to punish people. We have to say that a loving and merciful God is giving us exactly what we are asking for. Now it's on us, ain't it? And God is long-suffering. He said, you put me to the test these 10 times. You've not listened to me. They shall not see the land. But my servant Caleb, who has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully. I love that. I've got that underlined in my Bible. He has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully. I will bring into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. And the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valley. Tomorrow turn and move out of the wilderness by way of the Red Sea. So now this begins the 40 years. A lot more is going to happen here. All righty? A lot more is going to take place before this is all over with. We're going to stop there tonight because it is 8:42. We're going to stop there tonight, and we'll pick up there next week. And I know I've slowed way down for this, but to me, this becomes a very crucial thing for the rest of the Bible. So we did slow there. So next week will be October the 22nd. Okay. We will pronounce the death sentence, and then we'll rock on through Numbers. I don't know how far we'll get, but we'll see how far we can get. Okay. It is a long book. It is the longest book of the Pentateuch. Okay. So just remember that. That might just possibly be on a test somewhere down the line. Which is the longest book of the Pentateuch? Not the longest book of the Bible, just the Pentateuch. Thank you all. Does anybody have any questions, comments, thoughts?
No, thank you. Good class.
Okay, thank you. You guys are challenging me, and I appreciate it. You're making me a better teacher. Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
All right. Well, everybody
You
take
too.
care.
Hey, Rex, how's your wife?
Oh, she's doing fine. Thanks for asking.
Good, good.
Still got
Praise
some
God.
pain, but yeah, getting along.
So you think
Praise
about
God.
having that done?
Pardon?
You still buying into that surgery yourself?
Yeah, well, I think I'll have it next year. So
Oh, okay.
I've got a really bad back, so that's why I've been standing all night. I'm really in pain. So
I understand standing. Standing is a whole lot better than sitting. I understand.
Yeah.
Really do. So
Have a good evening.
everybody
You
have
guys too. Take care.
love all of you. Thank you. Amen.